Recording. Jazz hands.
I don't know why I gave you the jazz hands.
Jazz hands.
We will not be talking about jazz today, though.
No, we will not be talking about jazz today. But hello, Robert.
Hello, Andy Roo. Andy Roo, I don't know.
Andy Roo. Oh my goodness.
Move my microphone.
I'm tired. I don't know about you. Well, of course you're tired. You're you're living that dad life now. I've got nothing. I'm just tired. But
well, it's also
kind
of late. It's a late start for us, so.
It is, but it's all good. I don't know if I can really say it's been a while.
Been a couple weeks, something like that.
Been a couple weeks. Our last video recording, whatever you want to. Well, it would be both, because we're a podcast and a YouTube channel. We did our. What did we do? Oh my goodness,
we did our rant about mainstream music, and I also did a prog tier list, and that's the last couple things we've done.
You did, yeah. That was a cool video.
Thanks.
I did watch that afterwards. And I have to tell you about half of those bands I've never even heard of.
Do yourself a favor and check them all out.
Yes, for sure. I'm thinking about maybe doing a response video to yours.
Oh,
and that doing my own prog tier list.
Please
I think that would be fun. So stay tuned, folks. But Robert, tell the folks what we are doing tonight, my friend.
Well, as the title suggests, tonight, whatever time it is when you're watching this video, 3 in the morning, whatever, I don't know. We're going to do a top 5 list. It's going to be 5 artists each of what we personally believe, personal opinion, deal with it. Our top 5 what we think are the top 5 most overrated, we're going to say rock artists, because we realized right before we recorded that we both did pick just completely rock artists, right? So
yep, that's correct.
This isn't to say that these artists, in some cases we were even talking about, I would say, as far as like my list, most of these bands I at least like, and bands and artists I at least like one song. It's not even that they're all complete garbage, but overrated is a bit different. There can even be bands or artists that you really like that you go, yeah, they're a bit overrated. So I don't know what your approach was with the list. I would say mine was kind of sort of in between. There's definitely artists here I don't really like at all, and there's some that I do kind of like, or in one case do actually like it quite a bit. So
yeah, I mean, I for the most part approached my list pretty similar to that. I'll say that really out of the 5 bands that I picked, there's only one I really hate. I would say another one that I've come to dislike, but really only one I truly hate. And some other bands that I have on here, at one point I loved, would even go as far as saying were sort of my, my gateway or my starter kits into getting music. But just have different feelings about them now, which I'll explain, of course. But yeah, I mean, I just want to, emphasize that too, that there's a difference between, thinking that something's overrated versus just disliking it. While, like I said, there might be a few bands here that I do dislike, for the most part, just because you think something's overrated doesn't mean you hate it. Some of my favorite bands, which of course are not on this list, such as the Beatles or even Radiohead, you can make the argument are overrated.
Yeah.
I think probably about half the music, at least I've listened to, would be considered by many people overrated, right? So yeah, I think we just both want to make that clear, and that again, it is our opinion, guys. Our opinion. So we, while we're loving more action in the comment section, some of our last few videos, be nice to us. Be nice to us. Don't ridicule us.
Be nice to me. You can say what you want about him.
That's fine. Don't ridicule Robbie. If you're gonna hate on me.
Just kidding. But, don't hate on anybody.
Don't hate on anybody. I kid. But before we get started, we thought maybe we would just really quick have a little fun here and each of us will guess one band that we think will be on the other's list.
And I'm not
So,
gonna
Rob, I'll
say
let you.
neither of us are gonna say if they're on the list or not. We'll have to find out.
Correct. Yes, we
Yeah.
will not confirm
Or deny anything.
or deny anything. Thank
Okay.
you. Yes. So, I'll let you go first. What is one band that you think will be in my list?
Led Zeppelin.
Led Zeppelin. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. I said to you before we recorded that there are quite a few guesses that I made earlier. I'm gonna cheat because I don't care.
You're
Um,
gonna cheat.
I'm gonna say Joy Division just because when I
Mhm.
got to see you in person the other day in Jersey, we had a brief conversation about them. Um, and I totally get your reasons for feeling the way you do about them, by the way. So Joy Division is gonna be my one guess, and my other guess is gonna be Metallica.
I wanted to. I wanted to say that I drank quite a bit when I saw you, and I don't remember the Joy Division conversation.
Oh, really?
No. So there you go.
Okay then.
This is
So
gonna start out really well.
I'll let you have a second guess really quick, and then we'll get this thing
Second
started.
guess? I don't think I have one, to be honest. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Um,
All right.
I gotta think. Um,
That's funny. He doesn't remember.
yeah, maybe. How about Bruce Springsteen? We'll say Bruce Springsteen.
Bruce Springsteen. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
the last thing I want to say before we get into it is I'm curious to see if we have any crossovers because we've talked about that before.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
I do think there is a possible one band that we
Okay.
will
And if it
both
doesn't
have on
happen,
our
I want to
list.
know what band that is. Obviously, we know it's a band now, so.
Yes.
Okay, well
Yes.
with all that being said, we're gonna start out with Andy first. He's gonna do his number 5, then I'll do my number 5, then he'll do his 4. I'll do till we each get to 1. So maybe we could just say who the artist is and maybe just why we think they're overrated and just go from there.
And go from there. Okay, sounds good. So here we go. My number 5. Oh boy. Might be my most controversial. Might. This band, my number 5, is a band that I specifically have a love-hate relationship with these days, and that band is Queen.
Ooh, interesting. Okay, okay.
Queen is my number 5. So where do we even get started? So
That one
one of the
surprises me.
does it? Okay.
At one time, you said Queen was your favorite band. I remember when I first met you, you said Queen was your favorite band.
Yeah, so let's rewind a little bit because
Yeah.
I had said just a few minutes ago that some of these bands were sort of my gateway to music, and I remember the first CD I ever purchased with my own money was Queen's Greatest Hits. Um, Queen, along with I would probably say Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, were probably the 3 most important bands as far as getting into music around 14, 15 years old. Um, God, where do you even start with Queen? So one of my biggest gripes with them that everyone praises them for is how varied they are with genre, right? Specifically on each of their records. And while that's cool, and I have a lot of bands that I like that I think use a variety of influences and sounds, just because you have different forms of music, different genres of music, doesn't mean the execution's always going to be good. And I think they're an example of that.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can have an album worth of different genres and influences and make it cohesive sounding, right? So there's still something that's making that go together. And I don't think a single Queen album does that. I'll use an easy one such as A Night at the Opera, which is a great album. There's a song on there called Lazy on a Sunday Afternoon, and it's cool because it's got all this like quirky elements to it, and even like opera influence, which is very common in their music. But it's not a good song, and it just doesn't work with the rest of the record. And that's just one example, but I'm not gonna keep giving several examples about that. Um, Another thing, a gripe I have is Freddie Mercury specifically. Um, is Freddie Mercury objectively the greatest rock singer of all time? Absolutely. That doesn't mean I want to hear a professional singer in my rock music. I will take mediocre singing if the vocals are raw and passionate. I want it coming from here. I will take that in my music, especially my rock music, over, you know, professional vocals. I don't know. That's just my opinion, and I'm probably very much in the minority in that. I'm a guy that loves Tom Waits' voice. You know how many people can say that. Um, Queen kind of has gotten this surge of popularity with that movie that came out a few years ago, and I got back on the Queen hype train just like everybody else did. And at the time, I really liked that movie. But over the years and just rewatching it, um, I've come to really hate that movie, and I think that's part of why I'm kind of just tired of Queen. But one thing I will say that movie got right is, again, we talk about how great Freddie Mercury is. Yeah, he was great, but he he needed those other three
Yeah.
band members. Those solo records are awful. I don't care what anybody says. They are awful. I think they're a band, and this is why I kind of hate, um, individualism with rock music. Oh, the greatest guitar players, greatest bass players. We did a list not too long ago of greatest guitar players. Um, what I look for in a lot of the music I like is the unit, right? I think as a unit, those four guys bring the best out in each other, similar to how the Beatles were.
Yep.
The Beatles on their own in the beginning were just average boys playing rock and roll music, but they came together, and what those four guys brought was just pure magic. And I think same could be said about Queen. Um, but again, on an individual basis, I think Brian May's an overrated guitar player. I don't think John Taylor's that great of a drummer. And I think John Deacon is, besides Freddie Mercury, the MVP in that band. I really do. But
He's sort of
having
the
said
unsung
all
hero
of
of that band.
what's that?
He's kind of the unsung hero of that band.
He's very much the unsung hero. But having said all of that, I've talked about songs, on this podcast before that I'm sick and tired of hearing. While Bohemian Rhapsody is one of those overplayed songs, it is a song that I will still crank it up to 11 and kick out the jams to.
Mhm.
They have some of the greatest singles of all time. I just think they're not an albums band, at least for me. So those are just a few reasons why I think they're overrated. Despite the love-hate relationship that I have with them, at the end of the day, they're a band I love. I just think they're very overrated.
I think they have some underrated music too, which is
They
interesting.
do.
Because you hear, especially on the radio, it's and again, I've been hearing the radio again at work because people have been playing it, which is unfortunate. If it
Oh, I'm
wasn't for
sorry.
other people and having to go places, I probably would never hear the radio ever. But it just happens. And yeah, they always play the same stuff. Like there is a couple of their songs, like you said, there's a song like Bohemian Rhapsody, which is an all-time classic. Agreed with you. I will crank that one up to 11. Don't listen to that one very much anymore on its own. But when it comes on, I can appreciate it. There's a couple songs I could stand not hearing "We Will Rock You" anymore. I could stand not hearing something like, believe it
We
or
Are
not,
the Champions.
another one, "Bites the Dust." I've kind of
Yeah.
hit my limit on with that one. There's a couple others, maybe "Fat Bottom Girls," but then there's some songs that are those hit singles that are just like "Somebody to Love." I will always love that song. Or what else?
I actually think that song's better than Bohemian Rhapsody, personally.
I love that song. That is such a great song.
It's a
And then
great
there's
song.
songs like "Innuendo," which never get played, and I know that's one that we both really really love. Like that.
That's a
that
great song.
I personally think you were saying they aren't really albums band. I personally think though that last album that they made before Freddie Mercury died. I thought that was one of the best albums of their entire discography.
That
Um,
one's pretty good. I think my favorite out of all of theirs would be their third record, Sheer Heart Attack.
that's a great album too, and yeah,
It's a great record.
and I also
Um,
like News of the World too. There's a couple tracks on there that aren't,
News of the World has a lot of my
yeah,
favorite deep cut
deep cuts.
tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
My Melancholy Blues is such an
Yep.
underrated song.
Spread Your Wings. I
There's
love
another
that
song
song.
called All Dead. I
Yeah.
think it's a Brian May song. That song's a great track. And yeah, I should emphasize that too. In addition to the singles, lot of great deep cuts, and that's the thing. In general, they have so many great songs, whether they're
Hmm.
radio staples or not. I just don't think they're an albums band, which there's nothing wrong with that. Um, but yeah,
Um, it's weird.
surprised you with that one, huh?
You surprised me with that, and that's one actually. A lot of people, I think a lot of people would go, "Oh, yo, you can't say that about Queen." Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I agree and disagree. I think had it been a few years ago, even I would have said, and even before the Queen movie, I kind of started getting back into Queen. But for a long time, I kind of thought that I was like, man, I don't want to hear Queen anymore. I've heard a lot of them, but I've over the last maybe 5 years or so, I have a because as I've said this to you before, because I don't listen to a lot of mainstream radio or anything. When I've heard those songs again, I'm like, oh man, I remember why this was great. That kind of thing. And I've liked the deeper cuts, but I could agree that they're maybe a little become a bit overrated for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, they're my brother's favorite band. So, Nick, whenever you do or don't listen or watch this, apologies in advance.
But what about live? What is it? Live Killers, one of the best live albums of all time.
Live Killers, yeah. That one's okay. They did a lot of overdubs,
Oh, I didn't know
studio
that.
overdubs, yeah, on that album. But yeah,
Interesting
so that's my number
choice.
five, Queen.
Interesting
Um,
choice.
let's hear, yeah. Let's hear your number five, my friend.
My number five is a band that actually wasn't super into, and then got kind of into, and then now I'm just like, except for a couple albums now, and it's Metallica, which so you're there you go.
Got
Um,
it, got it.
you know, what bothers me about Metallica is that they're always hailed as the greatest metal band, and they are just not. Like, I'm sorry. I understand where it comes from because Metallica came around at a time where metal was becoming very derivative, and they kind of spearheaded thrash metal into, I guess, the mainstream. But I mean, have they really been that good since the Black Album? Like, what have they really done so remarkable since the Black Album? What do you have? Load, Reload, Saint Anger. Saint Anger. You had what was that? What's the name
Death
of the album?
Magnetic.
Death Magnetic. That's the one. I don't even really
And
know what they.
the last one came out a few years ago. I haven't listened to it. I can't think of it, but it came out a few years
The
ago.
only Metallica I can go back to, and even then it's not very often, are the first three albums, and some of And Justice. The reason I say some is because the production on that album is just horrible. And as
I
a
agree.
guy who is a big, I always notice the rhythm first. Um, well, mostly anyway, in a lot of like the bass and the drums. The fact that there's no bass on that album, or I guess it's turned down or whatever, I hate it. I hate the sound of that album. I can't stand it. It has some good songs, but they just don't. I just think the production's awful. And the Black Album, I think people give a lot of shit to because it's the big popular one, but there is a lot of good stuff on there. Not a perfect album, but a lot of good stuff. But other than, like I said, there's so many other metal bands that are. I mean, even as far as the big four, they would probably be maybe my least favorite of the big four.
Wow, really?
Yeah,
Least
at the
favorite?
very least, I like Megadeth and Anthrax better, I would say. But and I get why they're overrated. Like I said, they came around at a time where metal really kind of needed a kick in the ass. The Black Album was a huge album. They really made, as weird as it sounds, metal kind of more mainstream, I guess, in a different way. Um, in a different way than I mean like the really really derivative commercialized stuff bands like Poison or something kind of were doing. I don't know, but they haven't done anything in a long time. To me, there's just not enough material there to warrant that, and I just kind of get sick of everybody blowing smoke up their asses all the time.
Yeah.
You know? And my God, for like, I know you separate the artist from the art, but for being such like a heavy hardcore band, they are the biggest fucking whiny babies in the entire music industry.
Some kind of monster.
Yeah, like, you know, like, again, separate the artist from the art, but Jesus,
Yeah.
that's a footnote to it. But to me, musically, it's just not there, you know. But those first three albums are killer. I have to say that they are killer albums. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. So with Metallica, a few things that you said. One, I agree. The first three records are where it's at. Kill 'Em All took me a long time to warm up to, just because of the production. But it's very raw sounding. But it's a great record.
It is.
Ride the Lightning is my favorite Metallica record.
That's my favorite Metallica record too. That was the sweet spot. And Master of Puppets too, I would say, is my second.
I agree. Ride the Lightning is just so loaded.
Yeah.
So like those first 6 tracks, right? And then Masters, I would say, was like their peak.
Yeah.
Once Upon a Time, because I was a big Metallica fan.
All you guys were. I was always kind of like, eh. And then then after everybody else was kind of over them, that's when I got into Metallica.
Yeah. And Justice for All, a long time ago, was my favorite Metallica album, and honestly, I would probably put it close to the bottom at this point. I agree with you. The production's horrible. That the lack of bass, everybody talks about the And Justice for Jason or whatever that's on YouTube, and I don't think that does really any improvement, because the problem that you have with that is now you have too much bass, in that you have the bass turned up, but what people don't realize is the bass parts were done, but James was playing the bass via rhythm guitar. So it's almost like that's just as bad as the original. The Black Album, I don't necessarily agree that people hype that album up. I think hardcore fans specifically give that record a hard time, and I think, it's just take it for what it is type of thing.
I actually thought
they're good songs. It's fun.
I think they proved that they could be good songwriters with that album, and because they did write some really good ones. But then it just, to me, the stuff that they did after the Black Album just didn't. Because I've heard some of Load, I've heard a little of Reload. We won't even talk about Saint Anger, and even Death Magnetic was kind of like an improvement. I remember when that album came out and being a little hype about it, and then I was like listening to it, and I was like, nothing here is really blowing me away. Like, it was better than those other 3 records, and then I just kind of lost interest in them, you know?
Yeah, same. It's bad. I remember at the time thinking it was good. I actually remember the day that album came out. Right after school, Matt and I went to Walmart. Our mutual friend Matt went to Walmart. We both bought a copy of Death Magnetic. With Load and Reload, I've said this before, this might be a little controversial. I think Load and Reload, you take the best songs off both those albums, sequence them into one album. You have an album that's on par with the Black Album, possibly better, quite frankly, because I think there's some solid hard rock, even bluesy songs off both those albums. A solid record is there, that's for sure. And my last anecdote I'll make about Metallica before moving on to my number 4 is, because you'd mentioned the Big Four. I've seen the Big Four live together.
I know.
I've seen Megadeth and Slayer a couple times, but I back when the Big Four was doing those tours in 2010 and 2011, they did a show in Yankee Stadium. It was the only East Coast show, all 4 bands. And while all 4 were great, I think Mustaine was having surgery, like literally right after Megadeth's performance.
Oh yeah, was that when he had cancer?
So, not maybe I don't
He had
remember.
like throat cancer or
Um,
something.
yeah, that might have
Yeah.
been a little more recent. But he was having some type of like major surgery. I don't remember what it was. Um, but I gotta say, and while I will say, while I do think they're also overrated, probably out of the big four at the end of the day, Metallica is my favorite still. But whatever your feelings are about Metallica, they were hands down the best band that night live.
Hmm.
They just the moment they hit that stage, it was just like, oh my God. Like, yeah, there's a reason why they're considered probably one of the greatest bands of all time.
I think they're.
Um,
I think they.
but
Yeah, I'm sorry. Finish what you were saying.
no, I was just gonna say, but I mean, I agree with every point that you made about them in terms of being overrated for sure. But God, they kicked ass that night.
And one
They
other thing
oh
that
my
bothers
God,
me
so
about them a
good.
little bit, aside from maybe Black Sabbath, who I almost don't really want to count because Black Sabbath is, I mean, they're like, I mean, they almost they're the pioneers. They invented the genre essentially, you know. But Metallica is the only band that really gets a lot of. I mean, and I guess who cares about like the whole mainstream press and all that, but they're always the band that everybody fawns over, you know. They're kind of like the critical
Yeah,
darlings, and I don't get it. I mean, there's lots of other great metal bands that I think far surpass Metallica, and that's my personal opinion. You know, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people who, I know they have tons and tons of fans. There's their reason they're still as popular as they are. It's just for me, over the years, I can't really listen to much outside of those couple albums I mentioned. Really,
I think that's because I agree with you. I think that's a very good point.
I don't doubt they were
Um,
amazing live though. So,
And I think because they've become such a brand,
hmm.
just like my number four that I'm going to talk about in a second, they've become such a brand, like beyond just, the music.
Hmm.
And I think that's why the mainstream and both the critics, um, kind of give like the heavy metal, whatever, kings
Yeah,
to them, which no, you're right. It does not, that does not belong to them. The crown does belong to Black Sabbath, but I think because they've just become such a brand now that's why Metallica gets that association.
hmm. That's a good segue into your number four. What's your number four? Enough
It is
about friggin'
because I think,
Metallica.
as I was just saying, my number four has become a brand as well. My number four is a band that um I've always just thought's okay. I think people in our friend group think I like them more than I actually do. And this is also the band that I think will be on your list. And that's Nirvana.
Hmm.
Nirvana is my number four. Um, I completely understand the cultural significance. Nirvana is what you associate with Generation X.
Hmm.
The cultural significance cannot be denied. Um, Having said that, I think a lot of their popularity and their rise was timing. They had timing on their side. People, whatever you think of it, people were just sick and tired of the late 80s and the music scene, specifically glam metal. You had these underground bands, whatever grunge is to you, whether they were from the Seattle scene or even there were bands, on the West Coast as well too that had that grunge sound that were starting to make wave. And I think anybody could have been that Nirvana. Soundgarden could have been that Nirvana. Alice in Chains could have been that Nirvana. I just think timing. Nirvana just happened to be the one. Um, yeah, they're a good band. They have some great hooks. I think everyone talks about how Kurt Cobain's this lyrical genius. I think he's average at best as a lyricist. I would not put him up there with the Dylans, with the Springsteens, with the Waits,
I don't
with
know if
Tom Petty's even.
I don't know
What's
if I
that?
have this right, but didn't Dave Grohl write some of their hits too?
I don't think so. I
I
don't
thought he
think
had written a
Dave
couple,
Grohl
like a hit or like a.
wrote any of their songs, to be honest
Okay,
with you.
I thought he wrote. I thought he like helped write or co-wrote or something at least, but I guess I'm
Maybe
wrong.
a few songs off of In Utero, their
Yeah.
last record, but I don't think so. But I could be wrong about that. Um, yeah, I think there are just so many grunge bands or bands that are borderline grunge that influence Nirvana that are just better, whether they are mainstream like Soundgarden and Alice in Chains. I think they blow Nirvana out of the water. But the real bands to check out are your Sonic Youths, your Melvins, your Pixies. Those to me are that's what I associate with whatever you want to define grunge as. All bands that influenced Nirvana, by the way. But another thing I will say about Nirvana, why I think they're overrated, is because, like Jimi Hendrix, we never got Nirvana's best record. I think I think Nirvana were on their way there because I think In Utero, their last album, is their best one. I can't help but wonder, and I kind of even see if Kurt Cobain never, you know, tragically passed away. I think Nirvana could have gone on a similar path to what Radiohead did. So Radiohead puts out OK Computer. Um, Many consider that as like the last great rock record. And then they put out Kid A, they deconstruct rock, and it's just this radically different thing. And then because they were already successful early, they had the critics and they were just able to do whatever they wanted. And I think Nirvana would have gone in that direction as well too. Um, there's always those what ifs, right? But as far as what we got, but also as far as what was surrounding that scene, that's really why I think they're overrated. And like Metallica, I hate that they've become a brand. I hate that you can find a Nirvana t-shirt and an Aeropostale and an American Eagle.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you've seen that one YouTube video of that guy asking people wearing band shirts if they can name three
I've
songs.
seen
You
it.
know what
Yeah,
video
yeah.
I'm talking about? Yeah, I like want to do that every time I see someone with a Nirvana shirt on specifically. It grinds my gears. That's a whole separate rant. Maybe that's another rant video for another day.
Well,
But
listen, I appreciate you ranting so much because number four for me is also Nirvana.
I knew it. I knew
So I
it.
don't need to say anything
Transition.
because you pretty much covered it. I mean, yeah, like pretty much. I'm sorry to just segue into it, but yeah, I
That
just
was
it just
perfect.
went
That was
perfectly.
perfect.
Yeah, like echo everything you have to say 1,000 times. When I first heard them, I liked a couple of the songs. Then I really hated them. Now, some of their unplugged stuff's pretty good. Um,
Yeah.
never mind. Like, yeah, I don't know. Like, you also have to understand, from my opinion, I'm not a big like the grunge scene. I've just never really got into. But I will say, Soundgarden, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, all better than Nirvana. I kind of have the same. Like, if those are the big four, like Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Alice in Chains, and Soundgarden, I would say that Nirvana is again my least favorite of the four.
Yeah.
So,
I would
um,
agree.
I don't think they're a terrible band, as I probably would have said at one point. Um, I think that um, they have a couple good songs, and I could. I'm so sick of hearing "Smells Like Teen Spirit," though. Like, I could. That's a song I could never hear again. Um, and I've also just never really liked Kurt's voice, to be honest. There's just something about his delivery that I just I don't know. I like good vocals. Um, but yeah, echo everything you would say. I would say when you said, I think the thing I agreed with you most on was when you said that they just happened to be at the right place at the right time,
Mhm.
which I think is very true. There's a lot of bands and artists that some might say overrated that I wouldn't say are overrated, but at least they had full careers of, I mean, they might have had 4 or 5, 6 albums to hone their craft. Whereas Nirvana had how many studio records? 3 or 4? Something like
Studio
that?
Records 3.
Yeah. So I mean, that's not. I mean, there's some good stuff in there, but is it really to the caliber of? I don't know. Like, do they to me? Do they really like fit on the enormous pedestal that they're put on? I don't think so. You know.
I think they deserve to be on the pedestal that they're on, but not for the reasons that they're on that
Hmm.
pedestal from. Again, I think I look at Nirvana more as a cultural significance more so than a
Yeah.
musical one, right? I mean, the musical significance kind of can't be denied. Um, and really, they were like the last biggest musical sensation in terms of rock music, right? We haven't
Mm,
had anything like Nirvana since, but I think the cultural significance comes closest more than anybody else to the Beatles. In terms of cultural significance, I don't think you can name another
hmm.
music artist that comes closer to the Beatles than Nirvana.
I'd have to think about that.
Excuse me.
I have to see if I would agree with you there, and I have to think about
Get
that.
get back to me on that one for
Mm.
sure. But I knew they were going to be on your list. I knew that
Yeah,
was going to be the one
that
that we
was an
were going
easy
to
number
share.
four for
Were
me.
you surprised that I had them on my list?
Yes and no. I didn't. You've never been a huge fan of them. Um,
Yeah,
I think back in the day when we hung out, I disliked them actively more than you.
I
Um,
do remember that.
but I always knew that you weren't like super. I remember you being like really into Soundgarden, um,
Mhm.
and like you said, stuff like the Pixies and whatnot. But yeah. And again, I will say, for me, not the biggest grunge fan, so there is that bias on my part. But even still, not being a great grunge fan, I could say that there's other much better grunge bands.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. All right, so
What's your number
then
three?
we'll go to my number three. My number three is a band that I used to love.
Hmm.
Now I just kind of like. They are probably my other controversial pick on this list. Um, with our audience, but also in our friend group, and the band that you did guess,
Oh, I knew it.
Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin is my number three. I'm gonna get the most controversial thing I have to say about Led Zeppelin out of the way.
I'm gonna
Um,
put a timestamp and send it to our mutual friend Dan. This is gonna be fun.
that's right. Like my brother Dan, who his favorite band is Led Zeppelin. I apologize in advance.
Oh, duh, he was on the
Um,
podcast too. Yeah, that Dan. So,
I know we should have got him for this episode.
yeah.
Um, I get that their influence is important. I don't think they deserve their legacy. I really don't.
Hmm.
I don't think they should be put up there with the greats. And for the sake of throwing names out there, we'll say the greats, the Beatles, the Stones, right? I don't think Zeppelin deserves to be on that pillar with them. And I think a lot of that has to do with the plagiarism allegations that have come out over the years. Look, it's one thing to be influenced by other people's music. It's one thing to borrow a riff, a lyrical line from another song, but give credit to that artist. But to blatantly rip off somebody else's song and claim it's yours, that's where I draw the line. So that's my biggest pet peeve with Led Zeppelin.
That seems to
Having
be a lot of
Go ahead.
people. A lot of people point that out. That's been quite a problem. What was the band Spirit? I think that sued them over Stairway to Heaven.
Over Stairway to Heaven. And
Yeah.
I don't know if you've listened. I forget the name of that Spirit track off the top of my head, but I don't know if you've ever listened to that riff. It is a carbon copy.
Hmm.
It is a carbon copy, but that's just one out of many examples, and probably not even the worst, to be honest with you. But having said all of that, I won't deny that they did things that were and still are cutting edge in music today, especially from a production standpoint. A couple of examples, that natural reverb on When the Levee Breaks, I get chills every time the moment that track starts. potentially my favorite Led Zeppelin
I
song.
love that is
Uh,
like probably top 10 songs for me. When the Levee
yeah.
Breaks.
And even although it's a song I'm sick and tired of, a whole lot of love. I love sort of like that tape delay, um, vocal effect that's in the beginning of the song
Which I
too.
think was
Again,
an accident.
that was so
Yeah.
groundbreaking in 1970, 1969, whenever that record was recorded. So, that can't be denied. They're a band that I think, as individual members, similar to Queen, I think 3 out of the 4 of those members are as overrated gets. And that would be Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Bonham. Starting with Plant, I think Robert Plant has some of the most annoying vocals to the point that I just find very irritating. Baby, baby, baby. Oh, I can't. I can't do it. I just can't. Um, while I think Page is one of the greatest riff masters, I think as a soloist, he's sloppy and just is overrated as far as a guitar soloist. Um, I think Bonham's a little overrated too, but I think he's a great drummer. I can't say that I don't think Bonham's a bad drummer, but once again, another band where to me the bass player is the MVP. And not only do I think John Paul Jones is the MVP in that band, I think he's the heart of Led Zeppelin as well too. A lot of the I shouldn't say a lot. All of the compositions come from him. A lot of people don't realize that not only is he a legitimate musician, but he's played on so many other people's records
Him
as
and
well
Jimmy
too.
Page both were session
Jimmy Page
musicians.
did, yeah,
They
Jimmy
both
Page did too. He played on a couple Stone singles. He was in the Yardbirds, of
Yep. He
course.
played on
Um,
Joe Cocker.
that's right, Joe
Played
Cocker
on
as
him
well.
on his, yeah.
And Bonham's played on a ton, or not Bonham, I'm sorry. John Paul Jones has played on a ton of stuff too. The one that stands out for me the most is REM's Automatic for the People. He did all the orchestration on that record, which is phenomenal, by the way. Um, I would say about half of their songs I don't want to hear ever again. Um, Led Zeppelin is a band that just gets so much overplay on, classic rock radio. But I will say in terms of hard rock bands, and hard rock's not really a style that I'm all that into that much. It doesn't really get better than Led Zeppelin. Maybe, and maybe I think you would agree with me on this actually. Maybe minus Deep Purple. I think Deep Purple's better personally. But yeah, that's.
It's close with those two. I really love Deep Purple, and I really love Led Zeppelin. Yeah, I don't know.
But what are your
Different.
thoughts on my controversial
So
take on Led
I
Zeppelin?
so I understand where you're coming from, and I think I would disagree a little. And I think where I disagree is that I think that at least in terms of what I can say about my list, and at least on the other three band versus the other three bands that you and I had just talked about, I think Led Zeppelin deserve it because they were very, and it's not something that you or I or people even a little older than us and definitely younger than us would know, but they were very much the underdogs when they were up and coming because they really weren't critical darlings like these other bands. The reason that Led Zeppelin is as huge as they are is because of the fans. It's because of having a cult following. When they came out, like all the rock critics, especially guys like like Rolling Stone, if you remember, they had to retract all their original reviews because they gave them like 1 star, saying the band's not gonna last past 6 months or whatever. I think they deserve it because they really earned it more than a lot of other bands. That's
You
that's
could,
that's where I would
yeah.
say that's the big reason I would say I would disagree is just because they had to really overcome a lot of that crap to find, much like a band like Rush, who are now finally, critically accepted because of the fans and the cult following, and a few other
Mhm.
bands I could probably think of, but that's my reason for saying that I think they deserve it. I agree that there's quite a few songs now with them that I've has been overplayed that I don't really like, but for me, when they really hit it, they really hit it. And you were talking about Queen. I would say Queen actually, it's the opposite case with Led Zeppelin, where I think they're way more of an album band, and especially live too. I mean, some of their live records, or some of their, like, remember the Snow Jobs bootleg? My God, some of their
I still have
live
that.
performances from the '70s are just some amazing stuff. So, while I can understand where you're coming from, I disagree. That's my
Fair
opinion.
enough. Fair enough.
Yeah.
I think you can almost say that they are the OG cult band, right?
Well, the OG cult band's the Grateful Dead. That's
Yeah.
the great.
Grateful Dead does have them
But
beat,
then
don't they?
it would be
Okay.
like the
Okay.
Dead, then Zeppelin, I would say, because like I said, they really it's I don't think people, and I mean, I don't think I wasn't alive in the '70s, but from just talking to people of that generation, I don't think people our age realize how huge they were when they came out and how just obsessed people were with them, you know.
Yeah. Yeah,
So,
that's a good point. Um yeah, I didn't even like Rolling Stone years later put out like a whole apology
yes,
issue
they put
to
out an
Led Zeppelin,
apology
because now
issue.
Led Zeppelin's like glorified
Yeah.
with Rolling Stone magazine specifically.
Yeah, which is what one reason why, like, one reason of many, I hate them, because of the the hypocrisy of it. It's like,
Oh,
you know,
that's another rant video right
oh
there.
God, we could have a whole rant on Rolling Stone magazine. I understand now though, I especially with how often they're played on the radio, like I said, and you know, you often see them at the top of lists and things like that, and you know, to me, there's quite a few better bands, and I'm not sure if I maybe the best hard rock band, certainly in the top 3 or 5 for me.
Hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. It's hard.
Yeah, it is. I guess I'd have to think about that too. One last thing I forgot to mention about Led Zeppelin that you brought up. Going back to my point with Queen, that I don't think they're an albums band. I did forget to mention that about Led Zeppelin. That I do agree. I do think they work better with the LP format.
Yeah.
I can't say there's a record of theirs that I would give 5 stars personally, but I do agree in that they work better as an LP band.
Hmm.
But I think if you're gonna listen to Led Zeppelin, you gotta listen to Led Zeppelin live.
Oh
They
yeah.
are they are a live band, and that's something I have to give them. That's something I cannot deny, and specifically that Snow Jobs bootleg, which as I just stated a couple minutes ago, I still have my copy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
Send me that. I want to listen to it. I don't have it anymore.
I will. I'll send that to you. All
Anyway,
right. So, what is your number 3?
my number 3. Okay. Switching gears from that. I guess that style of music. This is a band that I don't even think I even really dislike them. I'm just tired of hearing them. Was never a huge fan of them, and I think they're so incredibly overrated. And the band is U2.
Mm. They were
I
another one I had a feeling were going to be on your list.
like. I've never hated them. Um, they've got some good songs. I've tried. I think it was the Joshua Tree. It's all right, you know. Like, it wasn't. I think I can see how back in the day, and I haven't. I will preface this by saying I haven't listened to any of their newer records. But at least they're like, you know, '80s to, like, say early '90s, mid whatever they, you know, their more popular era was. I just don't see it. A lot of it sounds to me the same, and they to me just sound super generic. That's my personal opinion, and I think I might understand why. It seems like they influenced a lot of bands, so I think they were the sort of the first of their kind. But these days, I just don't think they sound. I'm having a hard time explaining it. Like, they just don't sound maybe as unique as they may have when they in the '80s and everything, when they first got big. I don't know. Maybe that's not a reason to judge them too harshly, but I'm also just not necessarily the biggest fan of that style of music. I like art rock, like the stuff like, the Talking Heads, Peter Gabriel, that early 80s right after post-punk sort of thing. But then when you get into that kind of more mainstream new wavy kind of sound, I know U2 gets more into pop, and they get a little bit more kind of at some points electronic-y and stuff, and it's like just don't get it, to be honest.
Mhm.
Yeah, their sound never really did much for me. And man, as far as popularity, U2, they've been on top for a long, long, long time. And I don't know, I just don't see it. The songwriting, I'll admit they write some good songs, but not enough for me. I guess their music isn't varied enough for me, or maybe I just haven't heard enough of it. But I just don't really. I just never got on with them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So U2, and first of all, yeah, I mean they're a band, and I contemplated them on my list, and they could make a subsequent top five overrated list in the future.
Hmm.
They're a band I've come to really love. But I mean they are overrated. Like it does not get. They are like that example of Rolling Stone magazine. They could put out, fart noises, and it would be a
Yeah.
5 star in Rolling Stone magazine. Um, but I will say their early records are great. Their first few, Boy, The Unforgettable Fire,
I've heard some of that one.
yeah, they're like some of those really early stuff. I can't think. October, that's another one. Pretty great, very post-punky. And I think even like once you get to Joshua Tree, an overrated album for sure. But I think is interesting about the Joshua Tree is it it still has those post-punks leniency, but with a pop sensibility as well. But I actually think out of like their run of like their first 6 records, I'd probably put Joshua Tree on the bottom because I
Hmm.
think the stuff that they did after Joshua Tree, the electronic stuff, specifically what is that album called? Why can't I think of it? The one that they put out right after. It's got One on it.
Yeah.
Mysterious. I can't think of it off the top of my head at the moment, but that's a great album. Um, I think eventually they became generic sounding, and
Yeah.
today they are definitely generic. I would say right around the 2000s when they put out an album called All That You Can't Leave Behind. That's kind of when they became this generic, bland band, and I think the reason why people associate them overall as generic is because of your more contemporary bands like your Coldplays and stuff like that
I
are
think,
like
well, they
U2
influenced.
offsprings almost.
I know that they influenced so many of those bands, and in a way, it isn't fair to just like mark them down for that. But it's just, I don't know. I'm not a fan of that sound anyway.
But
So,
they put it upon themselves too.
yeah, they
So
do. Yeah.
it is fair. Especially someone like Bono specifically. I gotta tell you though, I think The Edge is a great guitar player.
Yeah, yeah. I actually think the Edge is pretty good.
Those arpeggios, man, and the
Yeah.
way the guitar for him is more of a soundscape
Hmm.
as opposed to traditional, rock guitar playing. So I think that's really neat. But yeah, I mean,
But
I don't
if you want
disagree with anything.
soundscapes, Frippo Pants does it better.
Oh, dude, 100%,
Like,
1,000%.
yeah,
But having said all that, I don't disagree with a single point
yeah.
that you made about you two.
You
Anything
got
else
me
that?
intrigued about the first couple records because if they do sound, because I do like some post punk and I like I said, a lot of that early art rock new wave. To me, that the really special period of part or that period of music was like the really early, like late '70s, really early '80s when you had those early
Yeah.
Gabriel records. You had Talking Heads. You had bands like Japan. You had oh, blanking out here, but just you had like bands like Joy Division and New Order and stuff like that. Really
Hmm.
early scene there was a lot of really good. You had Bauhaus, who I'm pretty sure for one of the first like
Echo and the
goth, yeah,
Bunnymen.
that some of that stuff is really really good, and then it got
That's
super
great.
super generic. So if they have more of that sound, I'd be a bit more intrigued with that. I haven't really listened to much of their early records, but
War was the other early album I was trying to think of,
mhm.
and I think that might be the best out of the early stuff.
but to
And
me,
then the one I was thinking of after Joshua Tree is Octung Baby,
but to
which
me,
might be my favorite U2 album.
just mostly knowing the hits, and like I said, I've listened to the Joshua Tree and everything, and um, I haven't gone deep with the band, but I just haven't liked the sound enough to dive deep into the band. And it's just for the level of popularity, like the level, like you said, they can make up album of fart noises and it's gonna get 5 stars. Like I just don't see it. That's just me.
Yeah, yeah,
So
I get it. I get it. I can't counter argument any of
yeah,
that because I get it, and it took me a podcast to finally kind of give you to their due, if you
yeah.
will, right? Because I like you said, like they like the band themselves kind of bring that upon themselves. Like someone like Bono, as
Ugh,
annoying and preachy as he is,
ugh.
it's like fuck you. I don't want to listen to your music.
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
the thing. It's like you try to like I always try to separate the artist from the art, but sometimes you get some kind of monster. You get Bono talking about how great he is because he's donating all this money and all this shit. Nah, I'm good, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I
they have
get
some
it. I
good
get it.
songs.
I
I mean,
really do.
judging on a musical
Um,
basis, they have some good songs. I think they're
yep.
talented. I just don't see the level of popularity they are. I just don't get it.
Fair
So,
enough. Did you have anything else to add with
number
the
two,
boys
sir.
from
What's your number
Ireland?
two?
All right, my number two. This might surprise you, actually. My number two was a band that I once loved, and I'm getting to a point I hate them. Um, and that band is Tool.
Tool. Wow, wow,
Tool, yeah. So I
wow.
remember getting into Tool probably right around the same time I got into Dream Theater, which is another band who once upon a time was my favorite band. I don't really care for anymore, but I wouldn't classify them as a band I hate. Whereas Tool, I might. Um, First and foremost, let's just get this out of the way. They're not exceptional as everyone makes them out to be. There, I said it, Tool fans. Speaking of Tool fans, I don't think there's a fan base that gets any worse and toxic and moronic in terms of music than the Tool fan base. So, Sound of Muzak listeners, if you're a Tool fan, I apologize in advance if I've offended you because you like Tool. Tool is your favorite band. Um, I, I was just reading an article before we started recording this, and basically, the title of the article was Tool. It was like something I'm paraphrasing. Tool is a white trash person's favorite band. And I don't think that's far off because I think Tool diehards are people that are just fucking high on crystal meth and probably just slept with their sister. Like that's a Tool fan to me. Like that, it really is.
The poor
And
man's King Crimson.
yeah, I know. That might be a little harsh. So you might want to edit that out, but that's okay. Anyways,
No, we're
I
keeping it
think
in. We don't
this is
censor
raw,
things here.
baby. This is raw. So in addition to the annoying fan base, I think the band is pompous too. Specifically Maynard James Keenan. I think they're terrible to their fans. I mean, I remember on Twitter a few years ago, Maynard literally said his fans were retarded. Look it up. It's out there.
Wow.
But then like again, going back to I'm just gonna say it. Moronic Tool fans, their response is, well, you just don't get it, man. They're mysterious, man. It's Tool. You know, the Fibonacci sequence, math. Like, no, fuck off. Fuck off. Um, you know, I get the music industry, which we talked about um, in another video, is very different than it was in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I understand that gone are the days where artists put out a record every year, every other year. But my God, do they have wide gaps in between records? Specifically, their last record, Fear Inoculum, that came out in 2019, there was a 13-year delay between 10,000 Days and Fear Inoculum. And for what? There was no natural progression. To me, that record just sounded like recycled songs, throwaway songs from the last record. And we waited 13 years for this, but again,
Yeah.
Tool fans are like, "Oh, this is just the greatest thing ever." I just, I hate the fans. I think the band, the music is overrated. I don't think it's as complex as people make it out to be. But I will say I do admire the simple complexities of their music. Um, the best comparison I can make is with Pink Floyd in that aspect. Um, and there are like a few select songs that I really dig, but I just, I don't know. I don't get it. There are people out there that think Tool is the greatest thing that was ever invented since sliced bread, and I just can't wrap my head around it. And that's why I think they're overrated.
I am. I'm probably in the minority of people who think they're okay. Like, I mean, I like I like Ladderless and is it Enema? Yeah,
I think it's pronounced enema.
yeah,
I could be
Enema.
wrong.
Yeah, those are two good albums, but I've never really went much further, and I've not listened to either of them in a long time. I really liked Enema.
They're
Um,
both pretty good albums. The problem is they're so long. That's the other
yeah,
thing. Their records, their songs are just so long, and they don't need to be.
maybe it's because I listen to a lot of older music, but I like a 40-minute album.
I think 35 to 40 minutes is the sweet spot.
That is 40 minutes. That is all you need for 45 tops, 35 minimum. You get that
Yeah,
is beautiful.
we get to I agree. You get to 45, it's like, all
You
right, I'll
know,
let
that's
this
why I'm not
slide.
really the biggest fan of
But like
double.
once you hit 50 minutes, it's like, come
Yeah.
on.
I mean, when you have God, some albums going over an hour, you know, that's why I'm not even really a double record fan either.
Mhm.
Um but yeah, I don't know. Just they're pretty good. I've always kind of liked them, but I never saw why people got so into them, you know. And there's just not a lot of material there either. Um,
There's not. And I agree with that. I will say one thing I forgot to mention is um they are a great band live. And
oh,
I
I'm
saw
sure, yeah.
Tool live 9 years ago. Um, and I will say that the way they incorporate the visuals with the music is unlike anything else. The closest maybe would be Nine Inch Nails, um, as far as their live stage production. But like the records, like the songs, it's like, come on, let's wrap this up already. This song does not need to have the same noodly part for 5 minutes.
Guys, listen to King Crimson instead.
There you go. Listen to King Crimson. We did a whole
Yeah,
discography on them. You should check that out, by
yeah.
the way.
The Where Tool is, King Crimson should be like 5 steps above it because they're amazing.
I agree.
That's my opinion.
I
That was
agree. But
I didn't expect that was an interesting one. I didn't expect that one from you.
oh, good,
Yeah,
good. Well, I'm glad I could throw a curveball at you. But
yeah.
yeah, that might be the one I could potentially get ridiculed for. Is Tool even more than Led Zeppelin? But we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see. But what's your number two?
My number two is a very easy one, and I have a feeling you might agree with me here, or you may disagree. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's the Sex Pistols.
Mm.
One album. Like I know. Look, and we were talking about how there's not enough material for Tool. They got like what, 6 albums? That's still 5 more albums than the Sex. I mean, I think they have other albums, but the one that they're really known for is just one album. I don't even know. I should really look at their discography.
I'm looking it up now.
Yeah,
Keep
please look
going.
it up. But let's be realistic. The only one that everybody knows. I mean, the fact that I'm not even sure if they have other albums is, I think, evidence of the fact that, like, I mean, that people blow so much smoke up that album's ass, and it's like, I know it was influential, but first of all, it wasn't the first punk record. It's not the best
No,
punk record by far, and I don't even think it's the most influential punk record.
I
Like,
agree.
one record, and there's an elephant in the room I need to address, and I think it goes into some of why some of these bands and some of these artists are overrated and blown up. And it's gonna sound a little cynical, but when a musician or an artist dies really tragically, suddenly it's like they were the biggest genius on earth. Sid Vicious, Kurt
Sid
Cobain,
Vicious there.
you know, they do it
Jim.
with Jim Morrison and everything, and Janice Joplin, Jimi Hendrix. I'll say with at least Jimi Hendrix, I think he's as great as everybody says he was. Jim Morrison, I think the Doors are a great band. Jim Morrison himself, okay. Janis Joplin, she was pretty great too and everything, but there's something about when a musician dies, especially young, very tragically, suddenly it's like they're a legend, you know, legacy. Sid Vicious was such a bad bass player. They brought back the guy they fired to do the album. That's how bad of a bass player he is. And he was in a punk band. Like, punk is not like.
It doesn't get any more rock and roll people's music than punk rock music, right?
I guess. I again, that's another subgenre. I don't hate punk completely. There's some good punk bands, but I just never got into it. I think it's overrated. And the Sex Pistols, for one album, I don't get it. Like, I just don't get it.
So first of all, I didn't even think about the Sex Pistols for this list, which is pretty crazy that they didn't come to mind for me as well. But I 100% agree with everything you said. They're a band. Not only are they overrated, I think they suck too.
Yeah.
I agree. But unlike Nirvana and even like again Led Zeppelin to a degree where I can understand the influence,
Yeah.
I just don't get the significance and the influence on the Sex Pistols because hello, The Clash, which
Yeah.
was literally around the same time.
Yeah.
What? And I did look up, by the way, they just had the one album. It
Yeah.
does list under other albums. I can't talk.
I thought it was just one
an album called Spunk, which is just early recordings. I guess it was a bootleg. And then there's just a plethora of compilation albums. But never mind the bollocks. Here's the Sex Pistols.
If you're gonna talk about influential punk albums or punk artists, why are we not talking about like why that band and that one album? What about The Damned? What about the New York Dolls? What about like you said, I think the Clash. I mean, the Clash are probably one of the more famous punk bands, or like the Ramones. But like, there's so many other punk bands that are way more influential.
Wire, Gang of Four.
There you go.
And because you said New York Dolls, which I would say is pre-punk,
Still.
proto-punk, but the fucking Stooges. Hello.
Yeah, there you go.
And even as far as the Sex Pistols go, Johnny Rotten, which fuck that guy, by the way,
Yeah.
but even his band that he formed after Public Image Ltd is so much better They're actually a pretty good band. So much better than the Sex Pistols. So even taking a member in that band, I spot on agree. I don't get it.
I
I
don't
don't.
get it either. I just don't like. I don't even know what else to say about it. It was one album. I mean, they're in the fucking Rock and Roll Hall of Fame for one
Yeah.
album.
Yeah.
For one album. I mean, even these guys, at least they're still going, and they have like 20 something albums, and they've sold more records, and they're sold more, and they've influenced bands. How are the Sex Pistols in there for one album? I don't get it.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. That's
It drives me absolutely fucking bananas. And you always see on like Rolling Stones lists, it's always in the top 100 or I don't know what number it is, but it's like, dude, are you serious? I just don't get it.
I don't know. Is it that high now?
I think it was at one point.
At one point I think it was, but I don't. I feel like I will say I don't think that record, from a critical standpoint, gets as much love as it used to, which is a good thing, of
I'm
course.
glad.
But well, it's my turn, I guess. So we'll have to go back to this later. But are you good on the Sex Pistols?
The Sex Pistols was the one artist that I
rage out?
the one that I just needed to let it out because
Dude,
I just don't get it, you know? Like, I really don't. And I'm not a punk fan for the most part. I think there's some great punk, especially from the early period, like some of the artists that we mentioned, but the Sex Pistols is not one of them. And that's my number 2.
I cannot believe the Sex Pistols didn't even come to mind. Wow. All right. Well, that's kind of hard to top, but my number 1, I think once I say it, you won't be surprised because let's just say in a rant video, I had a little mini rant about my number 1. Not only do I think this band is one of the most overrated bands potentially ever, but I can't stand this band. I don't get the appeal. I think that a specific member is a phony, and I don't understand the love with this person, but that band and this person, because he might as well be the band, are the fucking Foo Fighters. The Foo Fighters. I hate Dave Grohl. I hate him. I don't think he's the real deal. I think he is the biggest phony. While I think is a good drummer, I think he is riding the post-Nirvana wave, and not just with Foo Fighters. You know, no one knew who he was when he was in Nirvana. But that's not really related to the music or relevant to the music. I just think the music is super bland. Look, I'm all for fun, poppy music. I'm a big sucker for, power pop. I love my hooks. And the Foo Fighters have that. They do. But I just think it's so bland. You want to talk about generic. I don't think it gets any more generic than the Foo Fighters. And they're not rock. Look, rock is dead. We did a whole video about that in our last rant. But because rock is dead, people think the Foo Fighters are the freaking rock saviors. And they're just not. I wouldn't even call them a rock band. I think the Foo Fighters are like the equivalent of Nickelback. That's what I think of the Foo Fighters. I came across a really funny quote in an article I was reading earlier. And it said calling the Foo Fighters rock and roll is like calling Olive Garden authentic Italian food.
That's pretty funny.
That is a spot on statement, my friend.
I think what you said about them, because I don't hate the band. I don't even hate Dave Grohl or anything. But they are kind of like the white bread of rock. You know?
They're a one-trick pony.
Yeah, they're not really like they have some okay songs, but that's kind of their whole like what's that old saying? It's like uh better to be my brain, it's too late. Go keep going. I'll continue that thought in a minute.
The fact that not only are the Foo Fighters being inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but the fact that they're getting inducted the first year they're eligible, yet the Pixies have not been nominated at all, and I'm sorry, there would be no Nirvana, which means no Nirvana, no Foo Fighters, if it weren't for the Pixies.
Also, Iron Maiden didn't get in, and that pisses me off.
Well,
but I see
Steve
your point.
Albini, who produced the Pixies' debut album, Surfer Rosa, when Nirvana was getting ready to write and record In Utero, wanted Steve Albini to produce that record. He wanted a Nirvana record to sound like Surfer Rosa.
That kind of stuff.
Fucking Foo Fighters are going to be inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
That kind of stuff.
But Pixies are not in.
That kind of stuff is what drives me crazy. And by the way, yeah,
separate rant.
We should have done a rant on the recent announcement of the inductees, but yeah, I mean,
we still can.
You know, for all I was bitching about Metallica earlier, I do have to respect. I think it was actually even Lars that said when they were inducted, like, "Hey, it's great we're in here, but we wouldn't be here without Deep Purple, Rush, and then Thin Lizzy."
I think it was James that said that.
Oh, it was James, one of them, yeah. But like,
James, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's the whole argument that everybody has. Just again, perfect example there. I'm sure there's tons of bands that influence them, and for some reason they're getting in first, and that drives me crazy.
I had mentioned in that original Rock and Roll Hall of Fame rant video that, just so I'm not contradicting myself, I had mentioned in that original video that I not as much as you get worked up about this person not getting in before that person for the most part, but I will say when it comes to something like Nirvana, and now specifically the Foo Fighters, because it's Dave Grohl, that it's just bonkers that the Foo Fighters are getting in before the likes of the Pixies and Sonic Youth. I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, I don't get it either, personally.
But and again, just to go back to the music, because I don't think I really got into the music that much with the Foo Fighters. And another person I know their favorite band is the Foo Fighters. So shout out to Rosie if you ever watch or listen to this. I apologize. But I never got it, other than those hooks. I mean, there are some pretty sweet melodies in a few of their songs, but for the most part, again, I just think the songs are bland. I can't stand the song My Hero. I've never liked Monkey Wrench. And the newer stuff, it's just like, why are you even bothering? I would say they are the youngest dad rock band. There you go. The Foo Fighters, the youngest dad rock band.
Hey, I love dad rock. Come on. Like I said, I feel about them a bit how somebody, or like how I said how I feel about Tool, although I'd say I like Tool better, where I don't like, they're okay, I don't ever really listen to their albums. If a song's on the radio, I'm like, it's decent, but I'm not into, like, I don't like it enough to look deep into their catalog. It seems like,
yeah,
like you said, one trick pony seems about right. I don't know. And side note, Dave Grohl seems like he's, like you said, I don't know, maybe he's kind of a phony, I don't know. He always seemed like he was a decent guy, but one thing that drives me crazy, it's like every time there's some kind of event and they want somebody to like a artist to represent rock, it's always Dave Grohl.
Yes,
it's always
thank you.
Dave Grohl, and it's like, dude, there's so many other musicians you could pick. It's like what, like really?
He I don't know. Everyone talks about how he's like, he's this nice guy, like the people's, rock star, super relatable. And he's just always come off as a um a phony prick to me. And one of my biggest gripes is because I mean he's very popular. And when you see him in interviews, talk shows, he comes off as like this like hip guy. Like I remember watching a clip with him on I think it was James Gordon's show, whatever his talk show, Tonight Show is called. And Dave Grohl was on, and he was like, "Oh, I listened to this obscure band called Sepultura." First of all, Sepultura is not obscure.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe to James Gordon's audience, they're obscure, but stop. You're not a hipster. Sepultura
Yeah.
is not obscure. And then I remember when they did some Beatles special a few years ago. And I will say it was a pretty good performance. He you know, he was just like again, like, the Beatles, like, most important band in my life. But this song I'm gonna play is, a deep cut. And I was just like remember thinking, like, first of all, it's the Beatles. And yeah, I guess while you can argue they have some deep cuts, I'm like, stop trying to come off as Mr. Hipster. The song was Hey Bulldog, by the way. Great song.
Yeah, that's not really a
His
deep
performance
cut.
was great, but like I just, going back to my original point, I just think he's just always been phony to me. And on top of I just don't get the appeal to the music and everything else surrounding the Foo Fighters. I understand they're a killer live band, and I've seen some live clips, and yeah, they look like they would probably be a lot of fun to see live. Um, but I'm just not into the music to the point where I don't think I could sit through a 2-hour Foo Fighters show. But
Yeah, fair. Yeah,
that's
totally.
my take, my number one.
That was an interesting take. Number one, I think you'll appreciate. This I just put this one on here to rant about because, God, I'm sick of this
Oh, here we go.
band or guy, whatever you want to say, and you'll appreciate it as well. It's fucking Bon Jovi. I hate us being two guys from Jersey, by the way. Horror. I'm disgraced that he represents New. Listen to Bruce Springsteen. Don't listen to Bon Jovi because to me, okay, like if you listen to some of that, like stuff from like Slippery When Wet, or some of those early songs, from the late '80s, they're a glorified glam metal band. And there's some of the, to me, it's some of the worst of that period.
Yeah.
And then it's like they did a few of those albums, and then he kind of like got reinvented and became like I don't know what you'd even say, mainstream sort of pop, sort of like contemporary artist, and gets like, I don't know, a lot of critical and commercial success, and to me it's like, why? I just don't hear it. I've heard like I've heard like the late 80s stuff. I've heard some of the newer stuff because they've played some of that on the radio and stuff, and I'm just like, why do people like this guy? And especially chicks love him for some reason. I don't know what it is about John Bon Jovi that they love, but as somebody who's had to hear their music way too much on the radio and never really liked it in the first place, if I hear Living on a Prayer one more time, I'm gonna go nuts. Like, I hate that song. I hate that song so much.
Bon Jovi's another band that didn't cross my mind, and I think that's largely due because while I agree they're hands down one of the most overrated bands, I think my hatred, just outweighs, whatever thoughts I have of them being overrated. Whereas I think the Foo Fighters, it's a little more balanced, depending
Yeah.
on what day of the week will depend on, do I hate the fact, or do I hate more as to how overrated they are, or do I just hate the fact that I just think they're
I
terrible?
had to put one
Whereas
band. I had to
Bon
put.
Jovi, even though they're overrated extremely, the hatred for sure just outweighs anything
Thank
else.
you.
Anything else. Yeah, they're another one. Fuck them. And to all you other 49 states out there, on behalf of myself and Rob, we apologize.
Yeah. It
We
reminds me of. It
apologize.
reminds me of that. You ever see that episode of South Park where it's like Canada has apologized for Bryan Adams on several occasions? I feel like that about Bon Jovi. It's like New Jersey has apologized for Bon Jovi on several occasions. If you're gonna listen to anybody, listen to Bruce Springsteen.
To be fair, we gave you Bruce Springsteen, who is overrated
He's a great
in
songwriter, though.
some ways,
Yeah.
but he's incredible.
Yeah, he
He's
is.
incredible. So don't get that mad at us because we gave you Bruce Springsteen.
And and
Speaking, oh, go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
take it from your statement there that he would fall under, and I'm sure I could come up with like a list myself, like a separate list of bands that I think are overrated, but I think deserve, you know what I mean? Deserve the recognition they have. So I take it like Springsteen would be like that for you, maybe. Like maybe
Yeah,
you aren't personally
100%.
super into him, but but you think he deserves the attention he gets, or
100%.
yeah. I'm sure I could probably come
Absolutely.
up with a list of ones. But Bon Jovi, I just don't see it. Like
I don't either.
I just don't see it. Like the music sucks. It's super bland in my opinion. It's just it just seems to me, you talk about phony, like to me there's something really phony about, I don't know, him and his music, and I just have never liked it.
So speaking of that, actually, speaking of the phoniness, and speaking of, well, both Bruce Springsteen and John Bon Jovi, so Bruce Springsteen put out a record called The Rising shortly after 9/11. And Springsteen, like him or hate him, has always been an artist that can relate to the people as can people relate to Springsteen. And while I have not listened to The Rising, I know that it's gotten a lot of critical appraisal for the timing of when it came out. Like, it just was the perfect moment. It's what America needed to hear coming off the cusps of September 11th, 2001. Unlike Bruce Springsteen, John Bon Jovi, who probably thinks he can relate to everyday people, put out a record last year, Bon Jovi, and let's face it, Bon Jovi is John Bon Jovi, especially now more than ever.
Yeah.
Put out a record called I think it's called Bon Jovi 2020. And I haven't listened to this record either, but I can only imagine how terrible it is. He tried to do a similar thing to what Springsteen did with The Rising 20 years ago, but to relate it to the current COVID pandemic.
Oh God.
Unlike Bruce Springsteen, I just can't take John Bon Jovi serious enough to be the guy that, or the person that we need to connect to everyday people like you and me, to tell us that, you know what, Andy, you know what, Rob, it's gonna be okay. We're gonna get through it. Fuck you, John Bon Jovi. Fuck you. With my Jersey accent, fuck you.
Fuck you. And your mother too.
That's right, and your mother too.
I don't know.
I'm sure your mother's a really nice lady.
Yeah, I'm sure
John.
she is. Yeah. Just yeah. I think that was a good one to end it on. Just had to end it with one that I really just don't like at all. So
yeah, I think, yeah, wow, my blood is boiling now. Well, anyways, guys,
It was
so
between
that was
him.
our.
It was between him and another band from that period that I was between
Ooh,
for number
save
one.
it for another time.
I will,
Save it
yeah,
for another time.
yeah.
Because this may be an ongoing series because let's face it, Rob and I can both agree, as I'm sure you can all agree as well, that there are just tons of overrated bands. Most of Rob's list, I agree are overrated, and I think most of my list Rob would agree with as well too. So I think that this will continue to be an ongoing series. I think Rob, I'm gonna propose to you on air that we should follow this one up with a top five most underrated
Underrated.
bands.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Yeah.
Bands that we think that are underrated, because I think those are a little harder to come by. But I think we could do several more videos of five other bands, 10 other bands that we think are overrated for sure. But as we said in the beginning of the recording, guys, at the end of the day, these are just our opinions. Be nice. I know I got a little heated with my 2 and 1.
I
Um,
did too.
you know, just understand that, again, it's my opinion. And, if, these are your favorite bands, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that,
Yeah, if you like some or all of these bands, more power to you.
Music, right.
Unless it's Bon
Music,
Jovi.
yeah, except for Bon Jovi. Sorry, Bon Jovi fans, but are there Bon Jovi fans anymore?
Don't say
I
sorry to them.
digress.
Fuck them.
Music at the end of the day is subjective no matter what, because it's
Yeah, it's
you like
always
it or you
personal.
don't, right? It's so just remember that. And yeah, comment on YouTube. We are as always, we put most of our videos out on podcast format. So we are on Spotify, we're on Apple Music, Pocket Cast, or wherever you
YouTube,
listen
wherever.
to your podcasts. Um, that's all I got.
I think that's all I got too, guys. Thanks so much for watching. Check us out, like Andy said, and we'll see you next time.
Bye bye.
Peace.
Later, guys.